I always liked the idea of an outdoorsy summer. Then I remember how many plants I'm allergic to, how I take to extreme heat not unlike a walrus does, how phenomena like the red tide that's killing our ocean life also irritates my asthma, and I find myself more comfortable enjoying myself inside. And here's what I did so with. Join me on a journey to appreciate the little things. My summer kicked off with the wildly addictive new Pokemon Snap, the long-awaited follow-up to the N64 Classic, in which you take a rail shooter perspective to engage in Pokemon frolicking nature photography, and boy has the world of Pokemon never seemed so beautiful and lived in. As a downright stubborn Pokemon apologist, one thing I will not fight anyone on is that Pokemon world building sometimes lacks an observable waypoint. And this game is everything I wanted in that regard a dozen times over, as the habitats you explore will have you endeared to Pokemon you once never gave a second thought to, in addition to all your favorites. You have all the tools to create some absolutely stunning snapshots, but not without variables at your control that make the game easy to replay and get caught in a loop of experimenting and trying different paths and items to leave no stone unturned. As long as we're on the note of Pokemon, the web series Poketoons has been a fun source of highly stylized Pokemon adventures, including the feel-good story of a Pancham just doing his very best, presented in a storybook fashion that harkens back to a folk fable with a Pokemon twist, to the point that as a viewer I was personally able to take in a ton of meaning despite the piece not even being localized in English when I first watched it. I would do just anything for that little bruiser Pancham. Kevin Can Fuck Himself is two shows in one. Front-loaded as a sitcom typical of the heyday of the likes of Kevin James and Jim Belushi, centered around the irresponsible man-child named Kevin and his wife Allison, who cleans up after his antics. But when Allison leaves the room and the scene takes place from her point of view, we get a harrowing look at her psyche as the show becomes a dark thriller about a miserable woman desperate for a way out of the prison her marriage has become. There's a lot of interesting stuff coming from this show as the characters grow stunningly aware of their autonomy and how disturbingly their lives revolve around Kevin. To the excellent performance on part of Annie Murphy of Schitt's Creek fame. What really sets Kevin Can Fuck Himself apart, though, is how it weaves the sitcom and dramatic story threads and so successfully pokes at specific tropes, making its own irony kinda cave in on itself, to the point that the B-plot of Kevin's harebrained scheme to scam people with a homemade escape room not only resembles a very believable episode of a lousy sitcom, but plays alongside Allison's plot where she tangles with drug dealers on her endeavor seeking a way to poison Kevin, whose selfish schemes are destroying the couple's personal finances. Kevin Can Fuck Himself is rich with detail, altogether funny and dark, has me on the edge of my seat every time I sit down to watch it. Netflix did a new Gundam movie called Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway, and that was pretty alright, but to prepare new viewers for said movie, they also conveniently acquired the original trilogy of Gundam movies, telling the story of the retro series in a compact 8-hour eye bleeder altogether. I can see why the datedness of some old-school Gundam animation can be a turnoff to some, but I love that old-school anime vibe, and Gundam is the king of retro sci-fi sound effects. Oh, that's the good stuff. Gundam, despite all caveats, is a harrowing story of how war changes people with a rather cool surrounding mythos. And while all the human characters do look a bit cardboardy, I wouldn't say the same about some of the rather stunning battles between the towering mobile suits, each containing a character with hopes and dreams just waiting to be blown to smithereens. Perhaps it helps that Gundam was among the first to do big space battles, but there are some awe-inspiring set pieces over this trilogy, and I found it to be the perfect dunk into the pool after tiptoeing around interest in Gundam for a while now. Do we have room for one more old school Gundam sound effect? Oh, I love it. Do I find it a bit strange that we're still playing updated versions of the same game I saved my money for a PS3 for a decade and a half ago, instead of an all-new Virtua Fighter? Kinda, yeah, but Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown is a polished and addictive revisit of what's already a modern classic of fighting games. Featuring the most authentic and grounding martial arts practices I think of any fighting game, the cast of Virtua Fighter has a depth and potential for enlightenment that goes unmatched in the genre, making every fight in Virtua Fighter 5 5, a dance of wildly different battle mentalities and a thing of sort of visceral beauty that way. The biggest advantage to the sheer power of Virtua Fighter 5 is that its characters are such pure distillations of their archetypes that you can tell just about everything about a player by their approach to Virtua Fighter. My own history is someone who's been playing on and off for 15 years, starting with Leon on the PS3, but gradually growing to value defense over speed, leading me to play Jeffrey and Go today, for instance, allowing this game to paint an encompassing tapestry within Virtua Fighter's immense variety, distinct pace, and game feel that nothing else in the industry has truly emulated. Netflix's Castlevania series wrapped up over the summer, and after Season 3 felt like one of the most confused and identity-starved installments I've been disappointed by, Season 4 is a brilliant return to form, helped up by some great guest stars, Malcolm McDowell's Newcomer in particular going down as a personal favorite of mine. I never thought Castlevania would stand on its own without Dracula to act as the linchpin, but I was certainly proven wrong by the cathartic final battles of this saga. Powerhouse Studios brought their A-game to this series that made me really miss their distinct flair when Castlevania came to an end. A feeling that was fleeting, as they also released Masters of the Universe Revelation not long after. Say what you want about Kevin Smith, but this is clearly a labor of love, assembling a cast list that would make any geek of my stature completely gawk and using it to add a new chapter to the saga of He-Man. I love how this show keeps the toyetic fun of the Masters of the Universe IP fully intact, but never without taking some seriously daring story choices. Every character is faithful to their roots, but appropriately placed in a new context, which especially for the more innocent likes of Orko and Cringer is nothing short of captivating. This show is everything I look for in the evolution of a long-standing franchise with this much legacy behind it, and I can't wait for another batch of episodes. Seeing how dearly I hold the original Sailor Moon anime as a personal favorite, I've long been critical of Sailor Moon Crystal, a more accurate and streamlined adaptation of the manga that not only lost a lot of the old anime's personality and charm within these parameters, but was riddled with production problems that made the final showcase a bit rough in places. The people behind Crystal took a little extra time to regroup for their adaptation of the fourth story arc, and they really proved a lot with their grand comeback, Sailor Moon Eternal, which adapts the Dreams arc into 2 movies, creating an ultimate best of both worlds situation, wherein the most overstuffed arc of the original story is properly distilled into a dense and economically paced duology of films, and complemented by movie budget art and animation. Every character gets a proper spotlight, including my favorite storylet devoted to my main girl Sailor Mercury in years, propped against really memorable villains in the Amazon Trio and Quartet. This is actually the first and only case of a Sailor Moon arc where I recommend the modern distillation over the 90s adaptation, which if told I would be doing a year ago, I would probably have some kind of crisis, which should speak to the praise I have for this little pair of films. The third whitest thing about me is that I have a YouTube channel where I review and analyze geeky pop culture. The second whitest thing about me is that on top of that, I'm into golf, of all things. And those things compiled into the one whitest thing about me is that I was seriously popping off for Mario Golf Super Rush, and I don't see how anyone wouldn't be after taking a look at the impeccable country club threads the Mario cast got all decked out in for the occasion. Mario's golfing outfit is maybe unironically one of my favorite designs this year. The Nintendo player base has kinda had their knives out for this game, pointed at the sort of bare bones package one gets for their money, but I'll spend hours with any really good golf simulator given the chance. And from a pure golfing perspective, this is the most solid I've had in a while. And it's nice to have a Mario Golf with genuine Mario-y powers and elements. Plus, speed golf is absolutely addicting. Mario Golf, regardless of the generation, is just a good way to unwind, enjoy some ambiance, and oh come on, I so made that putt! I was like an inch away, this is garbage! Shows like Tim Robinson's I Think You Should Leave are hard to just sum up and recommend, and perhaps some first-hand demonstration would do the job best.
Talk! Sam brought it early! Yeah, right, you piece of dog shit! You're fucking dog shit! There's too much fucking shit on me, I can't!
Tim Robinson wrote on SNL for 1 year before it became apparent he wasn't a good fit, and the sheer chaos of his own sketch comedy is the most germane factor of that notion, and that's a massive compliment. My favorite comedy is the kind that barely makes sense to explain in any context, and I Think You Should Leave will have you muttering nonsense that only makes sense to you for months after watching. Let's dive into an intermission for some YouTube and podcast recommendations. My long commutes have been enriched by two big new additions to my podcast rotation. The first of which is Gayest Episode Ever, hosted by the articulate and engaging Drew Mackey and Glenn Lakin. Together they pick the LGBT-focused episodes of various sitcoms and other shows and scrutinize how representation has changed, and in some cases, for better or worse, hasn't. Drew and Glenn's eclectic repertoire of covered topics has bolstered not only the histories of shows like Friends and The Simpsons and how they handled or mishandled these topics, but also shined a light on the most obscure pop culture punchlines, such as Jason Bateman's tenure playing a gay man on the short-lived Some of My Best Friends, and James Avery's early career playing as the lovesick linebacker Bubba on Brothers. And the obscurity of these roles perhaps says a lot about the state of queer TV and the sheer service Drew and Glenn are performing in preserving its history. Not to be outdone, however, is Mall Talk, a podcast where every episode is an extended conversation on a shopping staple, from Tommy Bahama to Dave & Buster's to Wetzel's Pretzels, a pitch that might not be as interesting on paper if not for such organically funny and personable hosts as Emily Faye and Paige Weldon. Allow their every guest to bring their weird mall stories, which everyone has, to a long necessary spotlight, feeling like a refreshing shopping trip with friends after not being able to enjoy such a thing for so long. On the YouTube end of things, long underappreciated in the circuit of YouTube video essays has been Fox Cade. Foremost Devil May Cry historian of the internet, has a surprisingly broad catalog, including a brilliant coverage of Futurama, the only reasonable Pokemon take I've ever heard, and most importantly, a rundown of the TV disaster Pop Rock, which frankly must be seen to be believed.
I'm the baby merchant, tots are us, I give you all the service and no damn fuss. Give the baby merchant just...
It's hard to believe I've been enjoying the work of animator Harry Partridge since high school, far back quoting Dr. Bees and Steven the Lesbian, as long as I can remember, and he's handily proven he's still got it between the astonishing Dr. Bees follow-up and his enthralling action comedy pilot, Trilby Dogtooth. Harry's talent and hard work is apparent in every flourish of his animation, and if it'll help greenlight his ambitious projects, I implore anyone with the inclination to give him all the support you can. On the topic of YouTube animation, I felt the need to revisit Worth It Kids as a topic, not just because Big Top Burger is back and more fun than ever, but because his other project, Captain Yajima, melted my brain a bit, perfectly recreating the art style of Rankin Bass stop motion in Blender in a manner only a true fan of the style could, proving that Worthy isn't just creating new avenues for indie animation, but smashing them wide open. Speaking of breaking YouTube conventions, Scott the Woz is the face of the new wave of video game boys, and not a bit of this popularity has been unearned. Boosted by Scott's lightning-fast wit and edits, as well as ambitious work ethic, is his unique format of more so reviewing parameters of being a collector of games than actual games, more often than not, making a long-form video on the notion of how video game packaging has changed over time, and discs versus cartridges is a surprisingly fresh viewpoint, and one that allows for content that entertains and resonates really strongly. As someone who also has more video games than space in his apartment for video games. Knickknacks is a series by Pop Arena, who has made a mission out of reviewing and retrovising everything that has ever aired on Nickelodeon, whether it's a classic TV staple like Kid's Court or Mr. Ed, or something truly bizarre as Lancelot Link. Pop Arena's skills as a researcher and documentarian are beyond reproach and deserve far more recognition. Okay, now for a big one. Those of you who know my earlier internet days know that I wasn't always making video essays or analysis. My earliest internet community was collaborating on Disney vs. non-Disney villains, a series of long-form AMVs in which clips were weaved together to make villains from various animated films fight each other and gradually form a narrative. Disney vs. non-Disney villains was the first big thing I was ever a part of, uniting with my friend Man Wu to put it together. We started it in 2010, and since then, it's led me to some of my closest friends to this day and changed me as a creative forever. What started as an experimental collaborative editing project spiraled into a massive serial epic that has been a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember. I've since taken a leave of personal involvement with the series to focus on my own creative endeavors, and in the meantime, Man Wu has published the finale to Disney vs. non-Disney villains, and seeing a story that's been a huge part of my creative identity for a decade come to an end in such a well-built and beautiful way was unbelievably cathartic. Man Wu deserves a truckload of praise for the efforts he put into the work of art, and I'm exceedingly proud to call him my friend. I'd say all of Disney vs. non-Disney villains holds up well if you want to marathon it on Man Wu's channel. And if you want more content created by him and I together, check out the Animates, where we review cartoons en masse and only occasionally lose our minds. We're witnessing a rise of a subgenre of action movies I call John Wick-likes, taking after the king of modern action flicks, usually with similarly striking aesthetics, emphasis on world building and themes of family, recompense, and the juxtaposingly impersonal nature of a killing profession. Nobody was a film from early this year that fell into this category and was good, but its invocation of these tropes left me wanting John Wick over anything it built upon itself. Contrary to a film that borrows these ideas but uses them to compound its own identity in the form of Gunpowder Milkshake. It brings to the table some of the most stunning aesthetics and beautifully choreographed fight scenes, along with its leftovers in a big metal cup, filled to the tip with memorable characters. Gunpowder Milkshake asks the question of how a gun-toting action sequence would go over in stages like a bowling alley, video store, and a library filled with weapons, and answers that question with flying colors. This isn't to speak to the phenomenal cast: Karen Gillan, Lena Headey, and Michelle Yeoh, just a few highlights among an ensemble of kick-ass killers who all get a handful of badass moments to act as a cherry atop this delightfully decadent blockbuster indulgence. The Ninja Gaiden Master Collection came out, and I learned that I like Ninja Gaiden, but maybe not the right way. It's widely accepted that the first of the trilogy is the best, but honestly, my heart really belongs to Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2. As I've discovered over this first foray into the series for me. Sigma 2 is sometimes criticized for its hard turn into being more of a pure action game than the more diverse prior installment, which was peppered with puzzles and platforming, but to be honest, I actually think this skew toward a more full-on Devil May Cry-like hack and slash was for the best, not only creating a more focused experience, but one of the most viscerally satisfying action games I've recently played. Using Hayabusa's wide range of weapons, you have access to a myriad manner with which to tear your foes to ribbons, often culminating in polished and satisfying death blows. Just as impactful in tow are the game's colossal and stunning boss battles in gorgeous environments, swapping from a neon-bathed city to a feudal Japanese village in a single level and maintaining a resonant charm. I best characterize Ninja Gaiden as the answer to the most lifelike result of a character action game, where your foes don't dissipate into dust or explode upon death. They bleed out until you deal one more bone-snapping coup de grace, and the authentic, forceful animation of this game deliver that ideal brutally, creating a phenomenal experience for any aspiring ninja. When news hit that Rose Byrne was starring in Apple TV's Physical, I thought, neat! One of my favorite actresses doing a cute 80s aerobic show. And what I instead got was a sometimes disturbing and reflective piece on eating disorders and toxic relationships with fitness. With that context in mind, this one is not for the faint of heart, folks at home. The most chilling thing about Physical is that despite taking place at the dawn of recognizable diet culture, everything it has to say about the subject is applicable to related matters we hear about today, as far as demonizing foods, repressing urges, and calorie counting goes. As Rose's character Sheila is haunted by a self-deprecating inner monologue that hits too hard for comfort at times, and the length she takes to hide any evidence of her indulgences struck home for this viewer. The show captures a distinct and deceptive snapshot of a dark aspect still living in our culture, and the boldness Physical takes in exploring that has me enthralled every week it's on. I doubt I can sell America the Motion Picture all that much better than its own trailer does.
Ding dong! It's America, motherfucker!
The British are coming to get their asses kicked.
Let's go start a fucking revolution.
This is exactly the film it sells itself as. With a promising pedigree of alumni of the production of one of my favorite adult sitcoms ever, Archer, this movie has a unique look and a star-studded cast, with Channing Tatum, Andy Samberg, and Jason Mantzoukas giving standout voice performances in particular. You almost definitely know by now if this movie is for you, and even as someone who enjoyed it, you kind of get the joke well before the ending. But the genuinely pretty incredible action scenes and commitment across the board from an enthusiastic cast and crew pull it together really well. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is everything that made the old games from the iconic duo so great, but with a coat of paint only the power of the PlayStation 5 can provide. With consistently expressive characters and intricate paraphernalia that make it at times feel as though you're piloting an animated feature film. The big draw of Ratchet & Clank has always been the awe-inspiring arsenal of weapons you can carry into battle, and whether blowing foes to bits with the Enforcer, stalling them in place with the Topiary Sprinkler, or using the Rhino to rip literal holes in the environment's dimensional fabric, you have more than a few good options. Although I find some of the praise for the game's story to be a bit cloying in name of what I found to be a sort of by-the-numbers scenario, it's hoisted by some great performances from the likes of James Arnold Taylor and Jennifer Hale. It's hard to describe how fun it is to clear a literal crowd of enemies with the Black Hole Storm, and let hundreds of collectibles just fly into you without putting the controller in your hand. So if you're somehow still on the fence, consider this a big push from yours truly. I was extremely skeptical of Raya and the Last Dragon from early glimpses, colored by the recent 2 Disney animated features before being among my least favorites, and Raya's marketing displaying a tone I wasn't really amped for. I'd say the hokey humor and dialogue the trailer front-loaded was just one small aspect of what was otherwise a really grand movie. Raya does a phenomenal job building an atmosphere in each location you adventure to that quickly endears you to each place's culture and etches a place in my heart and mind long after my experience with the movie. Raya's supporting cast is among my favorite in a Disney movie in a long time, and the action scenes have streaks of impressive martial arts choreography that are jaw-dropping at best, harkening back to my personal favorite Disney movie, Mulan, in a way nothing else has in a while. I thought Raya was really cool, and it made someone that recent Disney installments had sculpted into an absolute cynic genuinely excited for what the mouse has in store for us next. I try not to do super redundant topics over the course of these particular Little Thing videos, but I don't have nearly enough opportunities to talk about My Hero Academia, and I felt I had more room to do it justice this year since it's turning out to be one of the best seasons yet, operating on smaller stakes than recent story arcs, but in a structure that allows the endearing characters of this world to shine. Class 1A is still a veritable crop of best boys and girls, if your name isn't Minetta, as is, and I love how well the show juggles an expanded cast, with Mount Lady getting a really fun spotlight, a lot of fascinating intrigue surrounding the charismatic and interesting Hawks, and the rivalry with Class 1B finally hitting a proper stride and properly introducing a slew of yet more memorable characters. I think the vestiges of All for One are a fascinating element that have me really curious to see where this is all going. Assuredly, it'll be a reliably wholesome shonen fare that makes an impact as powerful as a Delaware smash. Thanks again for watching. A Little Things video is always just what I need around the time it's time to make one, and they're always super fun. Really excited for more stuff, and I'll see you around. Thank you.